I, 30F, always knew I was unwanted. Not in the oops, I was an accident way, but because my parents actually said they wished they only had one kid, my twin sister. They straight up told me they only wanted her and I was some bonus they never asked for. Pretty messed up, right? Growing up, it was like living in someone else's family. My sister, Jennifer, was the star of the show. She had her own room, decorated with pink curtains, a Disney bedspread, and shelves full of toys. She was the little princess, while I was the extra in the background. My room was a tiny space with an old squeaky bed and a dresser from the 70s. The walls were bare, save for a few cracks in the paint that I'd trace with my fingers when I couldn't sleep. Every morning, I'd wake up to my parents talking about Jennifer's new clothes or activities, while I was left to figure out my day alone. They never noticed me unless it was to tell me to stay out of the way. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became my unofficial name. School wasn't an escape either. At parent-teacher conferences, they'd gush over Jennifer's finger paintings while ignoring my report card. I remember one time, I got straight A's, and I was so excited to show them. But when I handed over my report card, my mom just glanced at it and said, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to Jennifer's art project. She got everything: nice clothes, attention, even first pick at dinner. Her closet was full of new outfits, while I wore hand-me-downs from unknown cousins. I remember once finding a shirt in my drawer that still had a price tag on it. For a moment, I was thrilled, thinking they'd finally bought me something new. But then I realized it was just a gift someone had given Jennifer that she didn't want. Christmases and birthdays were the same story. Jennifer got showered with gifts, and I got one or two things, just enough so they could say they got me something. One year, they forgot my birthday entirely. I spent the whole day waiting for them to remember, but they never did. The next morning, my mom realized her mistake and tried to cover it up by giving me a half-eaten box of chocolates she'd gotten as a gift from a coworker. It wasn't just about the stuff. Jennifer's toys were sacred relics. If I touched one, she'd scream, and I'd get scolded for not respecting her space. Once, I borrowed one of her dolls when she was at a sleepover. I just wanted to play with it for a little while, to imagine what it was like to have something nice. But Jennifer found out somehow, and my parents grounded me for a week. At meals, she got first pick of everything, and if I complained, my mom would say, "Be grateful you're getting anything at all." I learned to eat quickly and quietly, trying to finish before Jennifer could claim seconds of the good stuff. The only person who saw me was my grandfather. He'd take me fishing or tell me stories on his porch. For a few hours each week, I felt normal, not like the unwanted twin. He taught me how to bait a hook and clean a fish, skills my parents never bothered to teach me. He'd listen to me, really listen, when I talked about school or my dreams. Sometimes, he'd slip me a few dollars, telling me to save it for something special. But then he got sick with cancer. My parents took Jennifer to visit him, but told me to stay home. They said he needed rest and too many visitors would tire him out. But Jennifer got to go every time. I'd sneak out to see him when I could, and he'd try to cheer me up, telling me how strong I was. "You're a fighter," he'd say, his voice weaker each time. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." When he passed away, it felt like the one good thing in my life was gone. At the funeral, my parents had Jennifer up front with them while I was shoved to the back. I could barely see the casket past all the relatives who seemed to have forgotten I existed. After the service, people kept coming up to Jennifer, hugging her and telling her how sorry they were for her loss. No one said a word to me. After that, things got worse. Any attention I used to get disappeared completely. I became a ghost in my own home, fading into the background of family photos. There's this one picture from a family reunion where you can only see half of my face because I was pushed to the edge of the frame to make room for Jennifer and her new boyfriend. I tried standing up for myself sometimes, but it always backfired. Once, I asked why Jennifer got a new phone for her birthday when mine was 3 years old and barely working. My mom brushed me off, saying Jennifer needed it for her social media presence and I was fine with what I had. When I pushed, saying it wasn't fair, I got yelled at for being selfish and ungrateful. So I learned to keep quiet and blend in. My dad was even worse. He'd look at me like I was a problem to fix, saying, "You need to shape up, kid. Why can't you be more like your sister?" It was like he genuinely believed I was the one screwing up by just existing. Jennifer played into it, turning on the waterworks whenever she wanted something. I realized I'd never be their favorite, no matter what I did. Growing up unwanted messes with your head. You start believing you're the problem. I spent years trying to figure out what was wrong with me, why I couldn't be the daughter they wanted. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the cracks in my ceiling, wishing I could disappear to make their lives easier. Sometimes, I'd fantasize about running away, but I never had the courage to actually do it. I turned 30 thinking things might change. I had a steady job at a local bookstore, nothing fancy, but it was something I'd achieved on my own. I was even saving up for my own place, dreaming of the day I could finally have a space that was truly mine. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. Jennifer got pregnant at 30, and the dad was some 25-year-old guy working dead-end jobs. His name was Mike, and he'd only been dating Jennifer for a few months. I remember thinking, finally, they'll have to face reality. They'll see that Jennifer isn't perfect. But I was wrong. Instead of a serious talk about consequences, my parents were thrilled. They threw a quick wedding, more of a party really, and suddenly everything was about Jennifer's new family. I tried to be happy for her, I really did. But it was hard when every conversation turned into baby talk or wedding plans. My mom started knitting baby clothes, something she'd never done for me or Jennifer. My dad was suddenly Mr. Fix-It, repairing things around the house to make it safe for the baby. A few weeks after the wedding, my mom called me downstairs with that smile I'd learned to hate. It was the same smile she'd use when she was about to say something she knew would hurt me, but she didn't care. She started talking about needing more space for the baby, and then dropped the bomb, "We need your room for the nursery." I was stunned. My room, the one tiny space that was mine, was being taken away. I tried to argue, asking where I was supposed to go. My mom just shrugged and said, "You're old enough to figure it out." She told me I should be grateful they let me stay as long as they did. I was 30, but I had nowhere to go, and they didn't care. My dad stood there, arms crossed, backing up my mom. "Look, you're a grown woman now. It's time you start taking responsibility for yourself," he said, like it was normal to kick out your kid for your other kid's baby. I wanted to scream, to ask them if they ever loved me at all, but the words stuck in my throat. That night, I packed my few belongings, some clothes, books, and things from my grandfather. Looking around my room one last time, I realized it wasn't much, but it had been mine. Now it would be a nursery, painted in soft pastels with a fancy crib, while I was out on the street. I asked where I should go, but they just shrugged it off. "We're sure you'll figure something out," my dad said. "We're doing this for your sister. She needs us right now," my mom added. I wanted to scream, "What about me? When have you ever been there when I needed you?" But I knew it was pointless. They'd made up their minds, and I was just an inconvenience in their perfect family fantasy. With nowhere else to go, I set up an old tent in the backyard. It was a camping tent my grandfather had given me years ago, one of the few things I had that was actually mine. The nights were cold and the ground was hard, but at least I was close to the house. Not that it helped, I could hear them inside, laughing and planning for the baby while I shivered outside. Winter made things worse. I tried to stay warm, piling on every piece of clothing I owned, but the cold seeped into my bones. I used a flashlight to look for jobs online on my old phone, but it was hard to focus when you're freezing and hungry. My fingers would get so cold I could barely type. My parents didn't notice or care. They were busy making my old room perfect for Jennifer's baby, painting the walls and assembling furniture. I'd watch them through the kitchen window sometimes, eating and talking like everything was fine. Like their other daughter wasn't living in a tent just feet away. Once, during a particularly cold night, I thought about knocking on the door, begging them to let me in. But my pride stopped me. I couldn't bear to see the annoyance in their eyes, to hear them tell me again how I was ruining things for Jennifer. I tried finding odd jobs, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, walking dogs, anything for a few dollars. Most people looked at me like I was a beggar, but a few gave me work. It wasn't much, but it was enough for some food and to keep my phone charged. I'd spend hours at the local library, using their internet to apply for jobs and their heat to thaw out. If my grandfather had been alive, he wouldn't have let this happen. But without him, I was alone. I thought about asking friends for help, but my parents had already told everyone I was a troublemaker who chose to live outside. They were all about keeping up their perfect family image. I heard through the grapevine that they were telling people I was finding myself and had chosen to live a minimalist lifestyle. The lies made me sick to my stomach. One freezing night in the tent, as I listened to the wind howling outside and felt the cold seeping through my sleeping bag, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. They weren't going to help me. They never cared. I was just extra baggage they'd finally gotten rid of. That's when I decided I was done trying to win their approval. I was going to figure things out on my own. I didn't know how, but I knew I couldn't stay in that backyard forever, hoping they'd let me back in. Living in the tent was a constant reminder of how alone I was. I was getting desperate. Winter was brutal, and I was always cold and hungry. I knew I had to do something, but my savings from odd jobs weren't enough to make a difference. I was starting to understand how people ended up on the streets, how easy it was to fall through the cracks when you had no support system. One day, after another failed job interview, try explaining why your address is a tenant backyard to a potential employer, I found myself wandering downtown. I was tired, hungry, and close to giving up. That's when I saw this little cafe. It looked warm and inviting, and the smell of fresh bread made my stomach growl. I stood outside, staring at the display window, trying to remember the last time I'd had a proper meal. The owner, an older woman named Linda, came out and asked if I needed something. I tried to play it cool, but she saw right through me. She had this look in her eyes, like she'd seen her share of hard times. She asked if I was looking for work, and I nodded immediately, hope flaring in my chest for the first time in weeks. Linda offered me a job sweeping floors, helping with deliveries, and cleaning up. It wasn't fancy, but she'd pay me cash and give me day-old bread. It felt like winning the lottery. Finally, I wouldn't go to sleep hungry in that tent. The work was hard, starting before dawn, but the moment I walked into that warm cafe, I knew I could do it. The smell of fresh coffee and baking bread was intoxicating. Linda wasn't warm and fuzzy, but she was fair. She started telling me about how she'd built the cafe after her own mom kicked her out years ago. I think she saw herself in me. For the first time in years, I felt like someone cared what happened to me. Linda gave me advice on budgeting and even offered to teach me some baking. She said I had a knack for it, which was the first real compliment I'd gotten in years. After a few weeks, Linda told me about a small room above the cafe that no one was using. It was just a storage space, but she said I could crash there if I wanted. I almost cried right there in the middle of the cafe. It was a huge step up from the tent, and I was beyond grateful. I moved my stuff in that night. The room was tiny, with just a single bed and a small window, but it was warm and dry. I remember lying on that bed, staring up at the ceiling, and feeling safe for the first time in months. It was the best sleep I'd had in a long time. Waking up every day and having a place to go felt like a big deal. I threw myself into the job, figuring if Linda was giving me a chance, I'd work my butt off. I learned how to knead dough, make the perfect latte, and even how to bake a decent apple pie. Linda was tough but fair, and she'd give me a nod or a grunt when I did something right. It wasn't much, but those little moments meant everything to me. As I worked at the cafe, I started to feel like I was finally moving forward instead of being stuck in one place. For the first time, I had hope that I could build a life for myself, even if my family didn't want me in theirs. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was starting to live. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of times I wanted to give up. But every morning, as I opened the cafe and smelled the fresh coffee brewing, I reminded myself that I was making it on my own. I was proving to myself, if no one else, that I had value. I still thought about my family sometimes, wondering if they ever missed me or regretted what they'd done. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, those thoughts came less often. I was building my own life, one day at a time, and for the first time, I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved happiness too. Update 1, it's been 3 months since I started working at Linda's cafe, and I can't believe how much has changed. For the first time, I feel like I'm moving forward instead of just treading water. The work is hard. I'm up before the sun, and by bedtime, every muscle aches. But it's a good ache, the kind that comes from accomplishment, not just existing. Linda's teaching me more than latte art. She's showing me how to run a business, manage money, and stand up for myself. It's like she's cramming years of parenting into months. She helped me set up a savings account. Think about your future, she said in her gruff way. We made a budget, and I'm saving a little each paycheck. It's not much, but it's more than I've ever had. I'm dreaming of my own place someday. A real apartment, all mine. It seems impossible, but I was in a tent 3 months ago, so who knows? The hardest part is thoughts of my family. I haven't heard from them, and most days I'm okay with that. But sometimes at night, I wonder if they notice I'm gone. Last week, I saw my mom in town. I was delivering pastries when I spotted her leaving a baby store, arms full of bags. I hid behind a car, heart pounding. I told Linda, and she said, sometimes the family we choose is better than the one we're born into. That hit home. The cafe folks have shown me more kindness in months than my family did in years. It's still hard. Seeing families in the cafe brings a pang of something. Not quite jealousy or sadness. Maybe just realizing what I never had. I'm focusing on the future. Linda hinted at promoting me to assistant manager. Me, in charge. It's exciting and scary. I've never had that kind of responsibility. So here I am. Working hard, saving money, building a life. Some days are better than others. Some nights I wake up thinking I'm back in that tent. But then I remember where I am, that I got here on my own, and it feels good. I don't know what's next. Part of me waits for something to go wrong, like it always did. But for once, I'm allowing myself to hope. Maybe this is the start of something good. Update 2, I can't believe I'm writing this, but I bought a house. Yes, you read that right. Me, the girl who was living in a tent a year ago, now owns a home. It's small and needs work, but it's mine. It happened fast. I'd been saving every penny from my cafe job, and Linda had promoted me to assistant manager. Then, a month ago, Linda said she was retiring and wanted me to buy the cafe. It was a lot to process, but it felt right. So, I did it. I bought the cafe and the attached house. I've been fixing it up, and every time I look around, I can't help but grin. This is mine. No one can take it away. But just when things were going well, I got a call from my mother. After a year of silence, she suddenly reached out. She'd heard about the cafe and congratulated me, as if she hadn't spent years saying I'd never amount to anything. Then came the kicker. Your father and I were wondering if we could come stay with you for a while? I nearly laughed. They kick me out, ignore me for a year, and now want to move in? We're having financial troubles, she continued. And with the new baby, Jennifer and Mike are struggling too. We thought we could all stay with you until we get back on our feet. I felt like I was dreaming. Or having a nightmare. They all want to move in? Into my tiny house that I've just started to make my own? I don't know what to do. I've been in a daze, trying to act normal. But inside, I'm a mess of emotions. Part of me wants to be the bigger person, to show I can be kind even to those who hurt me. But another part wants to tell them to go to hell, to feel what it's like to have nowhere to go. I keep looking around my house, at the walls I've painted and the furniture I've chosen. This is my safe space. Do I want to let them in? Do I want to risk losing everything I've worked for? But then I think about Jennifer's baby. My niece or nephew didn't do anything wrong. Don't they deserve a safe place? I need to decide soon. Mom's been calling non-stop. But every time I think I've made up my mind, I second-guess myself. What would you do? Am I terrible if I say no? Or a fool if I say yes. I've fought so hard for my independence. But is this the price of being an adult? Making impossible choices? I don't know what I'll do. But I know this, whatever I decide, it needs to be for me. Not out of guilt or obligation, but because it's what I truly want. I just wish I knew what that was. Update 3, I've made my decision. After days of agonizing, I told my family they can't move in. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was right for me. I called my mom, trying to be gentle. I'm sorry, but I can't have you all move in. My house is too small, and I'm still getting the cafe running. Her response was cold. So this is how you treat family? After all we've done for you? I almost laughed. All they've done? Like kicking me out? But I just said, I'm sorry you feel that way. This is my home and my decision. She hung up. I thought that was it. I was wrong. The next day, Jennifer texted about letting her baby be homeless. Then Dad called, threatening legal action. That house should belong to all of us, he said. Legal action? Over a house I bought myself? It scared me. I called Linda for advice. She suggested her lawyer friend, Sarah Johnson. Sarah listened to my story and said they don't have a legal case. The house and cafe are yours. But we need to be prepared. We went over my finances, documenting everything. Sarah advised me to save all communications and not engage with them anymore. I left feeling relieved yet terrified. It was comforting to have the law on my side, but needing protection from my own family was heartbreaking. That night, locking up the cafe, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness for lost relationships. Anger at their entitlement. Fear of what's next. But also, a growing strength. For the first time, I was standing up for myself. Not letting them bully or guilt me. Protecting what I'd worked for. This house and cafe are more than property. They're symbols of my independence and resilience. I'll fight to keep them. I don't know what's next. Maybe they'll back off. Maybe it's the start of a long battle. But I can handle it. I'm not that scared girl in a tent anymore. I'm a businesswoman, a homeowner, standing on my own feet. To anyone with toxic family, you have the right to set boundaries, say no, and create your own happiness. Even if it means leaving behind those who should have supported you. Wish me luck. I think I'll need it. Update 4, things have taken a wild turn. This morning, I found a legal notice in my mailbox. Jennifer is suing me, claiming the house should be considered family property. I couldn't believe it. I called Sarah immediately. She was calm, which helped me keep it together. Don't panic, she said. This doesn't change anything legally. They still don't have a case. During our emergency meeting, I showed Sarah a strange bank statement I'd found, dated just after my grandfather passed away. It showed a large deposit I didn't recognize. We dug deeper and made a shocking discovery: my grandfather had left me a substantial inheritance. But my parents had somehow gained control of the money through a legal loophole. They'd been using it for years, paying off their debts, funding Jennifer's wedding, even part of the down payment for their new house. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All those years of struggling, and they had been sitting on money that was rightfully mine. Sarah's voice was firm. Emily, this changes everything. We can countersue for fraud and theft. Over the next few days, Sarah and her team uncovered a trail of deceit that went back years. My parents hadn't just taken my inheritance, they'd systematically used it while letting me believe I was a financial burden. Sarah laid out our options. We could sue for the full amount of the inheritance, plus damages. It would likely bankrupt my family. Part of me wanted to do it, to make them feel as helpless as I once did. But another part hesitated. We don't have to decide right now, Sarah assured me. Take some time to think about what you really want out of this. So that's where I am now. Sitting in my little house, staring at stacks of legal documents that prove my family's betrayal. I'm angry, I'm hurt, but I'm also tired. So tired of fighting. Whatever I decide, I know one thing for sure, I'm done being their victim. I'm done letting them control my life and my happiness. This ends now, one way or another. Wish me luck. The real battle is just beginning. Update 5. I've done it. After much deliberation, I've decided to go ahead with the countersuit against my family. It wasn't easy, but I need to stand up for myself. We filed the paperwork yesterday, alleging fraud and misuse of inherited funds. Seeing my family members listed as defendants is surreal. As expected, all hell broke loose when they were served. My phone's been blowing up. Mom left a sobbing message asking how I could do this. Dad threatened to destroy me if I don't drop the suit. Jennifer's texts accuse me of trying to make her baby homeless. It's tough. Their words still cut deep, and part of me feels guilty. But then I remember years of neglect and know I must see this through. They're spreading lies about me to anyone who'll listen, family, friends, neighbors, distant relatives. I've heard they're calling me unstable and attention-seeking. The stress is taking its toll. I'm not sleeping well and have lost my appetite. Running the cafe helps distract me, but even there, customers have noticed my subdued demeanor. But it's not all bad. I've received unexpected support. Linda checks in daily and helps at the cafe when I'm meeting with Sarah. Coworkers have rallied around me, covering shifts when needed. Even distant cousins have reached out, sharing similar experiences with my parents and Jennifer. It's comforting to know I wasn't alone in feeling sidelined. Sarah, my lawyer, has become a friend and mentor. She reminds me daily that I deserve justice. Her confidence in our case bolsters my resolve when it wavers. Yesterday, I almost called Mom to reconcile, but Sarah stopped me. Remember, she said, they wronged you. You don't owe them an explanation. Stay strong. So that's what I'm trying to do. Stay strong. Take it one day at a time. Focus on the cafe and building my life, while Sarah handles the legal battle. It's not easy. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning. But then I look at my house and cafe, remembering why I'm fighting. This is about more than money. It's about breaking free from their control. The court date is months away, and there's a long road ahead. But for the first time, I feel like I'm taking control. I'm making my own choices, forging my own path. It's scary and stressful, but also empowering. Whatever happens, I'll come out stronger. I have to believe that. Wish me luck. The storm isn't over, but I'm learning to weather it. Update 6. It's over. After months of legal battles, the court has reached a verdict. I won. The judge ruled entirely in my favor, ordering my family to repay the entire inheritance plus damages. When the verdict was read, I looked at my family. Instead of remorse, all I saw was anger and resentment. In that moment, I realized this victory wasn't just about the money. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Sarah hugged me outside the courtroom and said, "You did it, Emily. You stood up for yourself and won." Her words meant more to me than the judge's verdict. The first few days after the trial were a blur. I had to meet with financial advisors to figure out what to do with the money. It's strange going from struggling to suddenly having more than I know what to do with. My family has cut all contact with me. They've blocked my number and unfriended me on social media. I heard they're telling everyone I've destroyed the family. It hurts, but I see now that they never truly cared about me. I was always just a means to an end for them. But for the first time in my life, I feel free. Free from their expectations, judgment, and constant disappointment. I've decided to use some of the money to expand the cafe, adding a small bookstore section. I'm also setting up a scholarship fund for kids from troubled homes. As for my family, I'm trying to let go of the anger. I'm in therapy now, working through years of emotional abuse and neglect. It's hard, but it's helping. I've realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who support you. Linda, Sarah, my cafe staff, they're my family now. So here I am, starting a new chapter. It's not the happily ever after I dreamed of as a kid, but it's real, and it's mine. To anyone struggling with toxic family members, you are worthy of love and respect. You have the right to stand up for yourself. It might be hard, but you can do it. As for me, I'm looking forward to the future for the first time in my life. I'll be facing it on my own terms, free from the shadow of my family's cruelty. Wish me luck on this new journey. But you know what? I don't think I'll need it. I've got this.